Right. Now, let's move on to the next step, and that is what is philosophy and what is science, or what is the relationship between philosophy and science. The distinction between philosophy and science is very slim, but there are some differences nonetheless. Many people assume that science and philosophy are contradictory to each other, but both subjects share a more positive relation than animosity. Generally speaking, science can be defined as a study or an understanding of the natural phenomena. It is concerned with empirical data, meaning data that can be observed, tested, and repeated. It is systematic in nature, and there is specific course of action used for the scientific method. Science bases its explanation on the results and objective evidence, experiments, and observational facts. Basically, science comes from Latin word scientia, meaning knowledge. There are many branches or fields of science depending upon the subject matter of that particular science, what kind of realities, what kind of things it is concentrated upon. To begin with, science basically started as a part of philosophy and it used to be called natural philosophy. But science deviated from philosophy in the 17th century and emerged as separate study or domain. Science involves objective type of questions as a study tries to find answers and prove them to be objective fact or truth. On the other hand, philosophy tries to study and understand the fundamental nature of two things: the existence of man and the relationship between man and existence. It also has many branches, as we discussed earlier, such as metaphysics, logic, epistemology, and ethics. And there are so many sub branches. Philosophy is basically based upon reason. Its method is its method utilizes logical argumentation, and philosophy uses arguments of principles as the basis of its explanation. Basically, philosophy entertains both subjective and objective kind of questions. This means that aside from finding answers, it also resolves to generate the questions and processes before finding out the answers. Philosophy is mostly involved with thinking and creative knowledge. The aim of both philosophy and science is to discover the truth. Although the methodologies differ, philosophy is based upon reasoning, while science is experimental in nature. Philosophy tries to comprehend metaphysical, epistemological, rational, and moral truths, while science restricts itself upon empirical truths alone. Generally speaking, people who consider science more important than philosophy and consider philosophy to be useful and futile, they normally come up with three main arguments or three main points. Number one, philosophy is dead or it's useless. Number two, there's no example in the history that philosophy has been useful for science. And number three, philosophy and science have entirely different subject matters. Now, the first point they make that philosophy is dead. Let's concentrate upon it. In order to prove that philosophy is dead, they will need an argument. An argument basically is provided by logic, hence it's called logical argument. Now, where do logical argument come from? Obviously, it comes from logic. And logic is the main branch, one of the main branches of philosophy. So basically, this point they try to make is self-contradictory, because in order to prove that philosophy is dead, they have to provide logical argument, and logic is a part of philosophy. So they cannot prove philosophy is dead without philosophy. Quite interesting. The second point they make, that there is no example that philosophy has been used for. Now we just discussed that philosophy, the function of philosophy is not only to answer the question, but also to raise the question. And these are the questions which science tries to answer. That is why it is called science. So philosophy does not generate questions. Science would not have anything to answer. That again means that science, in order to sustain itself, needs questions, and questions are generated by philosophy. The third point, that philosophy and science have different subject matters, again, that is baseless, because the aim and purpose of both philosophy and science is try to know the reality, try to search the truth. So both stand upon the same foundation, the search for the truth. In fact, it is philosophy which basically gave birth to science. And without philosophy, there wouldn't be any science. So this is baseless to say that philosophy is dead or philosophy is useful and science is more useful. Both have their own importance. After that, we move on to the next step, which is try to find out what do we mean by philosophy of science. As I mentioned earlier in the beginning that philosophy is the mother of all sciences. Philosophy of science is the sub-branch of philosophy which tries to dig out the reality of science. Although there is a great deal of differences between the philosophers about central problems of philosophy of science, but somehow there are few points on which I would say most of the philosophers of science would agree. So philosophy of science is concerned about questions or points. Number one, what is science? What qualifies science as a science? Basically, what are those principles which make science a science? What is the purpose of science? Why do we need science? What is the methodology of science? What are those methods and principles which we, by using, we can call a branch of knowledge as a science? What is a scientific theory? How does it qualifies to be a scientific theory? Again, what are those principles? What are those uh, points which makes a theory scientific theory, which differentiates scientific theory from all other mere speculations or imaginations? And one of the very important points philosophy of science is concerned about is the problems in science related to ethical issues or moral conduct. So, in fact, if you look deep into these points, we can figure out that four major branches of philosophy, which we discussed earlier, all these points fall under one of those four branches. Like, for example, ethical related issues in science. Should we leave science absolutely free to explore whatever it wants to and however it wants to operate? Or should we bound science to certain moral principles? That is the realm of moral philosophy or ethics. What is the scientific theory? What are those principles which make a theory a scientific theory, which differentiates it from other speculations? And this is the realm of logic. Logic is the study of those methods and principles which differentiate between correct reasoning and incorrect reasoning. So a scientific theory has to be logical theory. What is the methodology of science? Again, that is the realm of epistemology. What do we call genuine knowledge? How would we call knowledge of science as genuine knowledge? What are the criterions of genuine knowledge? That is basically the realm of epistemology. What is the purpose of science? What science tries to discover? The ultimate reality, the reality beyond this physical world. In a nutshell, that's what we call metaphysics. That is what metaphysics tries to do. So, in fact, there is no big difference between philosophy and science. In fact, science is a branch of philosophy. The difference, I would say, is just about methodology. The method science uses and the method philosophy uses. And at last, I would like to say that the realm or sphere of philosophy is much more broader than science. Science concentrates upon only, it restricts itself upon experimental truths, empirical truths rather, while philosophy plays with the experimental truths, rational, moral truths, so on and so forth. Philosophy encompasses metaphysical truths, social realities, political realities, all sorts of things. So, science is a branch of philosophy, and philosophy, as mother of all sciences, is the mother of natural science as well. And philosophy of science tries to dig out the reality of science, the foundation of science upon which the whole science ends. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and I hope you find it interesting. And I hope you would raise certain questions, some questions for the next lecture. And before discussing a new topic, I would try to answer those questions. Please do send me your questions through your WhatsApp group or through KCMS. Thank you very much.